Schools Work podcast, a podcast for everyone in education. This show is brought to you by the Southern Regional Education Board. At SREB, we believe that every school has the potential to be great. Whatever you do in the school, whatever your job may be, let's talk about things that make schools work.
Jason and Ashley, what's some of your favorite movie endings?
Usual Suspects.
Usual Suspects. Another one is
The Poet Society, Standing on the Desk.
Oh, I like the Thomas Crown Affair.
Oh my gosh, that's a good one too. Yep.
For all the rom-com fans, it's always part where they finally admit they're in love with each other and get together. So it's always
complete me.
Right. It's always the big line.
Know what happened in the entire movie.
Yeah. I'm just
you
a
complete
boy
me.
standing in front of a girl.
Right.
What movie is that?
Asking her to love me.
What movie is You Complete Me?
Jerry Maguire, Tom Cruise, Renee Zellweger stands at the door.
That's the one I've never seen.
It's good.
I'm sure it's
Human head weighs 7 pounds. The end of Pretty Woman, where he's in the limo being her knight with the umbrella up in the air. Vivian.
Or is it? And a gentleman, what's the movie that with Richard Gere too?
Gentleman.
Where he picks her up and
carrying
her
her
out.
out. Officer and a gentleman. That's it. Yeah.
Are you guys ready to podcast?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, welcome back to another Making Schools Work podcast episode. I am Daniel Rock, Senior Instructional Coach, joined by our producer, Ashley Shaw, and our Director for Instructional Programs, Jason Adair. We are beginning our second season of this podcast. Last year, we focused on instructional strategies, lesson design, and really dug into teaching. This year, we're going to expand a little bit and focus on the entire practice of educating students from the classroom, school, and sometimes even the district level. We're going to look at different types of schools, secondary schools, elementary schools, CTE programs, and all the different aspects of helping all of our students learn. So as we start this season, we were thinking about beginnings and starting over. And one of the great things about teaching is you always get the opportunity to begin again, whether it's a new unit, whether it's a new lesson, whether it's a new school year. As we recorded this episode, it is late August. So teachers will be getting ready to start school, or they've already started school. Jason, your son, Tim, is starting his career as a teacher. With that in mind, today's episode, we're going to think about how do you begin? How do you begin a school year? How do you begin a lesson? How do you begin a unit? How do you end a lesson? How do you end a unit? How do you end a school year so that it's impactful, so that students remember it and has meaning? Ashley and Jason, why do you think beginnings and endings are so important?
Think that in classrooms, students have, especially the older they get, students have a preconceived notion of what it's gonna look like. I remember talking to my kids. I'm like, what'd you do today? Every time it was syllabus, go over the rules. Every first day looked like that. It was so boring. They were so bored. And then they'd have one teacher where the science teacher started with an experiment, something blew up, that's the one they remembered. And everything else, by college, they're like, I don't even go the first day of school because they know it's just syllabus, going over the syllabus. So I think the teacher that left a memory was the one who did something interesting that blew up that preconceived notion of what it looked like. And it set the tone for the entire year. They were so excited to go to that science teacher's classroom because of how the lesson began. And then it perpetuated itself. Other kids started to know, I can't wait till I have Mr. Johnson.
It challenged the way that they had been thinking.
Yeah, their mental model, right?
Created dissonance in their mind.
Yep.
What is the expression? It's like you only get one shot to make a first impression. It's that people decide who you are based on that first, right or wrong. They know you based off of that first time they meet you. And so if you start your classroom and they're like, oh, this teacher's going to be boring, it doesn't matter as much what you do the rest of the year. You're already the boring teacher, or you're the fun teacher, and you can have a boring lesson, but you're still the fun teacher because that's what they have in their mind already. So I think that's a good way. That's why you want to start strong.
People are making impressions and decisions that first seconds of your lesson, of your year, of your unit, about what this is going to be. And it's not that you can never go back and fix it. And I think what's great about what I loved about teaching, and I do still love, is you can always start again. Every day is an opportunity to start again and to refocus the way people view. I want to talk a little bit about some cognitive research that's been done. Daniel Kahneman, who's a Nobel Prize winning psychologist, did research on what's called peak and ending memory. They looked at people experiencing extreme discomfort during medical procedures. And they found that doctors would deliberately, they'd kind of did out of an experiment. I don't know how ethical this was, but they deliberately extended the procedure, but made the end of it less painful. So the experience of going through the medical procedure was longer, but the end was less painful. And what they found was people recalled the procedure more favorably, even if it was longer, because the ending was less painful. They call this duration neglect. The retrospective memory of pain was strongly shaped by the worst moment and the ending, but not the total length. And so they have this concept called duration neglect, where the duration of experiences don't matter as much as the peak experience. Whatever is that most emotional and sort of intense experience, and the end. People tell themselves a story about what happened. So as a teacher, what I want us to think about is how we kind of create a story in our lessons where we have given them a powerful first impression, how we create a peak experience of emotion and intensity, and then end it with an ending that really is going to resonate. 180 days is a lot of days, Jason, to teach. And you can't have 180 days of fireworks in your classroom. Sometimes there's direct instruction. Sometimes there's review. But beginning and endings is where you want to try to get some of those fireworks. So thinking about that, I want to look at the lesson level. What are some ways to create a powerful beginning of a lesson? Like, what are some of your routines or go-tos that you like to bring in to lessons or help teachers think about to really help create memorable moments?
Yeah, I think that teachers can use, videos, little clip from a TV show, movie, commercial, something like that. It could just be a picture, could be a great story that makes it real, a personal experience from me that makes it real. I think anything that hooks into something prior and gets them thinking and talking, those are great ways to start a lesson so that whatever the teaching that I'm doing that day, they hook it to that clip from Braveheart where they're all storming the fields, or a commercial, or a picture of remember once the task was about Muir Woods. I showed, and these kids are in West Virginia, showed a big picture of a sequoia tree, one of the big trees from out west that they have no experience with whatsoever.
A similar strategy that we used, we were about to read Spring by Rachel Carson, where she talks about the poisoning of the environment. And so we put pictures of different environmental, some beautiful pastures, some toxic waste, some sort of farming using chemicals, and just have students rotate around writing. What do you see? What do you notice? What do you wonder?
Yeah.
The one thing that you said that is underused is stories. We are hardwired to be enthralled by a good story. And if you can find a way to build a personal story, like you're about to teach something, and you can create in your mind an experience and retell it about a time that you overcame an obstacle or faced a challenge or had an experience where that was relevant, all of a sudden, your kids will be with you. I remember teaching mythology, and there was a point where I told the story just for background of this myth. And I just remember them all just being with me, like 100%. Ashley, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say that this is a marketing thing, but it'll help, I think of the concept you're saying is that there's a reason if you see a commercial on TV for let's say a nonprofit, they can tell you all day long statistics about there are 95 million starving children in the world.
Right.
That's never going to be a very effective marketing campaign. You'd think hearing that high number would be more effective, but it's never going to be as effective as when you do see that story of the starving child and this is Cindy, and you put a name to the little kid, and that's why those commercials are like that, because of what you just said, that people are going to remember that story more than the data, even if the data is technically more daunting than the one individual story.
Correct. So. That's right. And you look at politics and political ads, most of them are somebody telling a story about how the other guy ruined their life. Right. And destroyed their family, or how the guy they like swooped in and saved them from the other guy.
But it's a story, not filled with a bunch of statistics.
Right. They'll have some statistics, but those are the ones that hit. Yep. Those are the ones that hit.
Yeah.
My composition class, I try to start storytelling. We start with personal narrative, which is common. That's not unique to me. But the way I teach the personal narrative is we watch a bunch of stand-up comedy, and we talk about how stand-up comedians use personal narratives in their routine. And then they have to write their personal narrative essay is they write their stand-up routine. But I work in an open mic night or open mic day in class where we all get to stand up and tell our story to the class. And I start, because if I'm telling them to tell it, basically at that level, we're not stand-up comedian. Our comedy is going to be, we just tell an embarrassing story that's just funny. Naturally, we don't have to make it funny. And so if I'm asking them to tell embarrassing stories, I should tell one. So I'll give them, I name my stories. I'll give them 5 choices, and the class gets to vote on which one they want me to tell. And so I start by standing up and telling an embarrassing story, and then they all do. And it bonds us. It's not only helping them learn this first paper that we actually are genuinely supposed to write, but it bonds us for the rest of the year. When I'm doing anything, they're more willing to talk. We have that relationship for the rest of the year.
And you're creating an emotional experience. And that's what that research on peak. So a peak experience is often something that elicits emotion. If you think back to your life, there's this psychological phenomenon called flashbulb memories. 9/11 is the big one. Challenger exploding. When the Challenger exploded, it's like, and maybe 9/11, they did the research where they actually had people come back and talk about that moment years later and how they remembered it. And they got their phone numbers and used those people to research them and the effect that experience had on that memory, where you were, what you did. Now, they actually found that some of the things we think we remember happening during those flashbulb moments are sometimes a little made up.
Yes.
And we think it's something, but then when they actually have the data, they find that it wasn't actually there, like you weren't actually in that room doing that thing. That said, as a teacher, one of my goals is to elicit an experience that is going to heighten their emotions, heighten their anticipation. Games are great. Competitions can be powerful.
You want to get them leaning in, right? So that when the lesson happens, their ears are engaged, their minds are engaged, everything's engaged so that they can participate in the learning that's going to happen and not just be a passive recipient of knowledge sharing.
What's going to build curiosity? And I have an episode on curiosity that I did. That's the question, to me, the only question that matters as a teacher. There's a lot of questions that matter. One of the most important questions that matter as a teacher is, how am I going to build curiosity? How am I going to get a kid genuinely interested? What quote, what picture, what video, what story, what debate, what question is going to do that? And throwing it all out there is critical. Let's move to endings of lesson. What are some of the best ways, Jason, that you think teachers can end a lesson that hits, that makes a point, so that it's like one of those movies? So it's like Seven, when, what's in the box, or to give them a Kaiser Sose moment. What are some ways that teachers might do that?
Yeah, this one's harder. It's easy to begin in a lesson, right, with a movie or something like that. The ending is harder because you want to figure out a way to tie your lesson into a nice little bow. I think maybe one of the things that I always think about is, I love when teachers end with a question that is not like, like you want to end a lesson with an evaluative question or something, right? But one that's thought-provoking, that leaves them thinking about that when they leave, right? So a question that forces them to analyze the learning that happened today and take it into the current circumstances. Something like that is something I think about, like when I remember one of my children came home and it's like, what'd you do in school today? And he's like, they were doing King Lear. And the teacher left the lesson with, how does what happened today reflect the current administration who was in power at the time? And it's how, and he's like, was unexpected. He loved it. You know what I mean? Like it made it relevant to him. And I thought that was a great way to, he's like, right as we were walking out the door, she posed this question, and it had him thinking all day.
That's interesting. And now I'm thinking, you've got me thinking about which administration that was, and which administration.
I'm not telling you.
Which administration is like King Lear, and I can see it in several different ones.
Right.
So, and I think it's one of those concepts around memory is, memories are created, right? They are something that is created in the brain. It's not something that is delivered to the brain. Like, you have to make the memory. So what can I do at the end of my lesson that will create a memory of what I want the students to remember? And one that I love is letter to a confused student. Letter to a confused student is where I say, Billy was absent yesterday. Can you write him, or was absent today? Can you write him an email summarizing what we learned and how this is going to help him with this concept? And maybe give him some tips on how to remember it. And forcing them to retell it, even though it's kind of a summary. It's not necessarily a high level question, but I can add that, like, what are some ways he can remember it? It's like you're telling them to write it to Billy, but they're really writing it to themselves.
Right. I think anything where they're summarizing and it doesn't seem like they're summarizing, right? Like tricking them into doing something, or not tricking, but like making it a little more relevant than writing a summary sentence for what happened today, right? That's one of those things. Kids have a mental model of what the end of a class looks like, and that fits that mental model. So it's not something that's interesting. Whereas if you say that, write a letter to a confused student, or you pose this question that has them thinking, or you end with a It could be that you end with a little clip from a video and you ask, how does that relate to what we learned today? You know, whatever it is, it's something that is a little more interesting than
What about
sometimes just letting the bell ring and letting them walk out the door.
yes,
Right.
which is probably how 90% of our lessons end.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, I have to make it a concerted, focused intention to have a true lesson ending. It can't be something that I expect to just happen. The beginning's going to happen, right? The beginning will always happen. The lesson
but
opening,
not always interesting, right?
not always interesting. No, but
I opened a fair amount of my classes with a warm up where there were 5 questions on the board that had nothing, that maybe had something to do, but they certainly weren't interesting.
I think what happens for me is I fall in love with my opening, and my beginning is so engaging and interesting and compelling that it lasts half the class and it becomes like the actual work period. And then they only have a few minutes to actually do the thing and then forget about the ending of the lesson.
Then you feel rushed at the end. And so I think when we look at that closing, we have to look at, okay, this is the learning that occurred today. How am I going to get them to process it and potentially so that it can transfer to what's happening tomorrow? I think that's what we really need to think about.
I think what you said about that King Lear example is so powerful because they were connecting it to relevance. Right. And how is this relevant? And that's what great teachers do. They're able to make and explain how what we did is relevant to the standard and to your life. And sometimes those two things overlap and sometimes they don't. But a great teacher is able to explain that. I want to move to units. I consider a unit about a 6-week series of lessons. So we talk about a lesson. So a series of lessons around a broader topic that has a real connection. So a unit in ELA could be around short stories. In history, it might be around the Revolutionary War or around the Greeks and Romans, right? It's a big sort of section of learning. And some of the best ways I think to introduce those to build relevance is I love guest speakers. If you can bring in a speaker to talk about your topic, this specific topic, and how they use it, or how it's, maybe they don't use it, but how it's related, or why your understanding of Rome. I'm a lawyer, and understanding the foundations of democracy and the rule of law goes back to Rome, or it goes back to common law. You're studying Britain and we use common law as part of our law. Like, you can bring in people to talk about that. That is an amazing way to start a unit. Another great way is anticipation guides that challenge students' preconceptions. Like, when you think you know something and you find out you don't, that grabs your attention. That makes you perk up a little bit. That's a great way to start a unit.
I was thinking of like math. We do this thing where it shows the population clock. So there's a US population clock that's always turning and increasing. And then there's a world one right next to it that's spinning super fast. And you just ask them, what do you notice? What do you wonder? And then you put in 7th grade, and then you pose some question about, when do you think the US population is going to hit 500 million, 400 million, whatever number you want. And that's obviously above what it is. And you have the kids use the math that they know at the time to solve that problem. And then you're able to say, in this unit, you're going to learn more sophisticated ways to do this. And so I think in science, they perform some experiment that maybe they don't have all the knowledge to do, or maybe they get stuck at some point and they're like, we don't know what to do. Great. In this unit, we're going to learn how to attack that. And you create this moment of, you said cognitive dissonance, or like this dissonance where they're like, I know there's something out there. I don't know what it is. Great. This is what we're going to learn in this unit. And they're like, oh, right. And then you can come back to that hook, that entry event throughout the unit and say, hey, what'd you learn today that would have helped you when I asked you to solve that population clock problem, or to, do this experiment? Like, what'd you learn today that would help you? And so I think that's what a good hook allows you to come back. That's what an anticipation guide does, what the guest speaker did. Hey, remember when that guest speaker was here? Remember when in that anticipation guide, when we asked this question, you didn't know the answer. What do you think now? I think it allows you to use that throughout the unit.
Debates are similar. I think debates are probably harder to use in math class, but anytime in a class you can look at two sides of an issue and you can find a conflict, like anytime you can identify conflict in something you're learning, it's going to draw interest. And that goes back to storytelling. We are attracted to these conflicts.
So an example of that would be we help some areas in Texas and New Mexico develop a course on several courses on energy and natural resource management, oil and gas, and out there hydraulic fracturing, otherwise known as fracking, is a big idea out there. We have a unit on it. What do we start with? A debate on should we frack or should we not? And it's a great way to start the discussion that there are a lot of myths out there. Some of them are not myths, and get the kids doing a smidge of research and then going at it. And then throughout the unit, learning what are those things out there that are myths? What are the protections that they really have to be thinking about? The kids love it because it is a controversial subject.
And now you're at a CTE class and you're bringing in literacy.
Yes.
You don't need to have a whole research project, but you can find a one-pager on both sides with evidence, and so that they have something to work from. Well, you used one term that I want to identify for both beginning and ending a unit, which is big idea. The key, I think, to engagement with students is always centering in your class those big ideas. We're doing this small task, but why are we doing it? Because we have to understand why energy matters, right? Why energy is what powers our world. We have to read this story because stories are how cultures continue and expand and grow. We have to do this math because, so reflections on those big ideas at the end, where they have to explain, reflect, or talk about how what they learned relates to the big ideas. That's an ending point that I really think has to be incorporated as you summarize and end a big unit.
I think that's that thing that's always on your mind as a teacher is, hopefully, is what's the big idea of this unit? And when I'm thinking at the unit level, so that I can have a beginning, I can have peaks, and I can have an ending that all tie to that big idea.
My favorite unit, and maybe I've talked about this on here before, that I taught was when we did Night, which is a Holocaust memoir, and we then researched other genocides besides the Holocaust, and students wrote monologues and scenes about the experiences of people in those various genocides, and we performed it. That's an experience, right? That's a culminating event. That's, I think, a powerful way. If you can end your unit with an event, a showcase, a presentation. In my English classes, when we did Shakespeare, we always ended with performing scenes, and they had to memorize those scenes. And it was difficult, but they had to design the scene and they had to have a playbook that explains why they made the choices that they did. Ashley, any reflections or thoughts about unit design, beginning and ending?
Well, I was going to just say, because you reminded me of an example from myself as a student. That's still one of the most memorable and fun experiences that I ever did, was when I was actually in law school. And law school, they have to offer a certain amount. I think they're just called law and classes. So it's law and something else, and you have to connect them. And I took a law and literature class. And one of the things we did was we read To Kill a Mockingbird. And then at the end, what we did was we each got assigned a character from the book, and we had to answer the question, what is law, from that character's point of view. So everybody had a different character, and then we all read them. So we heard, what is the law, from like several different characters. And mine was Reverend Sight, the Calpurnica's reverend in the story. And I wrote a sermon. So mine was all about the law is what God says, because I was a reverend in my example, but everybody's was, obviously Boo Radley's is different than Reverend Sykes versus Calpurnica's versus Scout versus Atticus Finch's. Everybody had a different definition. And it was so interesting first of all, everybody got to get into a character's head. So it helped with the literature part, but also understanding how everybody thinks of law differently and defines law differently. You think that's a standard word, but everybody had a different point of view of what it means to be a law, what it means to be lawful. Anyways, just like very interesting. It was my favorite assignment. That's still all to this.
And it's still, but listening to that, I hear big ideas, right?
Yeah.
That's the question. Yeah. That wasn't about understanding the story or the plot or the conflict. It wasn't just about understanding the law involved in that book. It was about the big ideas of law and what is law, why does it matter, and to whom does it matter and it touches people in different ways. And that's an amazing assignment
it builds empathy.
I could see a high school teacher using that. I could, in their classroom.
Yeah. Because it doesn't have to be what is law. That was a law school assignment that helped us think about the fact that if we have you're in a court case, then you have different but it could be what is anything. And you could do the same assignment that's relative to you in your class.
Jason, let's talk about the school year. Your son is starting teaching as a fourth or fifth grade teacher. Fourth grade teacher. What are some things you talked to him about? I'm assuming you gave him some tips for starting the school year. What are some tips you gave him as a first year teacher, thinking about how to begin the year strong?
I mean, that thing I said at the beginning, I said to him, I said, kids have a preconceived notion about what that first day is going to look like, and your job is to flip it upside down. And so I was like, how are you going to deal with your classroom expectations? He's like, well, I was just going to kind of, tell them what they were. I said, how about this? How about you give every kid 4 sticky notes, and you have them write down 4 things that they expect that should be classroom expectations for them, and then give them 4 more and say classroom expectations for you. What are the classroom expectations? What expectations should the teacher have for the student? And then what expectations should the student have for the teacher? And he's like, and then have them sort them into categories and then create a classroom norm, a classroom expectation based on each of the categories. And he said when they did the first one with the sticky notes, he's like, they can't. I said, they're all going to come up with the same things. They're going to come up with the exact same rules that you come up with, but they're going to own them. And he's like, they loved the first one. He said, but then when I ask them, what expectations do you have of me, the teacher? He said the eyes and the mouths of the kids their jaws dropped, because they'd never been asked that in their 4 previous years of like, wait, I can have expectations of you? Yeah, you can. You can expect me to be kind. You can expect me to hold the class to different, to when a student's rude or misbehaves, that I'm going to hold them accountable for that I'm going to be fair, that I'm going to do these things. And it was a great way to open. They had, now they have two posters in the room. He signed the one that is his expectations. All the kids autographed the one that they came up with because they are his. And when he has to enforce them, he's like, hey, these are the norms we came up with. You're not holding to them, the expectations. It was great. And then the second thing is, I said, open with a fun little math task. I said, the first thing they walk in the door, they have this estimation activity that they did. And it was a little bit more interesting than, it was how many, right? It was something that was interesting, and it was better than do this pre-test for the state that tells you what level, they have to do. Everybody's got pre-tests and where they look at where the kids are, and that has to happen, but it doesn't have to happen on day one. Right. And so
the superintendent once told her teachers, or she was a principal and she became superintendent, but as a principal, she told her teachers, I want you to teach one of your best 3 lessons on the first day of school. I don't want rules. I don't want syllabus. I don't want any of that. I want you to teach your best lesson. That first day of school is not, I think, the day to go over all of that. That is a day to show kids that they are here for an experience of learning and what that learning is going to be like. Because they do make a lot of decisions on that first day. And those decisions that they make are hard in terms of their assessment of you and their class and how they're going to have to be in the class. They want to, the whole Harry Wong approach is very relevant and important and fine, which is like the first 5 days of school, you have to teach them all of these things, how to be. But
routines and structures, right?
Routines and structures. You got to get routines and structures. I don't debate that.
Agreed.
I think though, that first day is a day for excitement, curiosity, and showing students the essence of what learning this topic is going to be. And then you come in with that other great stuff.
I remember as a classroom teacher, my first day after starting in year 3 was that, I saw that old video of the spaghetti tower where you get 20 pieces of spaghetti, 1 large marshmallow, some tape and some string. And you're like, with groups of 3, build as tall a tower. I want the marshmallow as high off the ground as possible. You have 18 minutes. You start the timer and you go. And I mean, the kids are like, they're all in, right? And then the second after they finish that, I can teach my norms, my expectations through that activity. But they're doing that first. And the kids always, and then those spaghetti towers, the winning one is sitting on the side of the room at all times. I can teach them. The 2 things I had in my room was, when you enter the room, I am a mathematician and I am part of a community of learners. And I could teach everything I needed through that one activity that got them. Then I could reinforce, so we're going to work collaboratively in this class. What are some norms that we're going to have to put in place for collaboration? Sometimes Mr. Adair is going to be doing some talking, right? But it was through the lens of that activity, and the kids loved it.
You're teaching them how to be in the class through a lesson.
Yep.
Not through telling them.
Yep.
How to be in this class. You're showing them.
It's kids learn by doing, right? That's that old book is kids learn by doing. And I started winning more battles than I did in my first couple years just from that, because I wasn't just telling them, we were doing it.
Sadly, in secondary, school often ends with a test. And can you imagine anything more boring and lame than ending a school year with a big state test or with a big final? How do you end a school year in a way that kids think back about, wow, I learned a lot in this class. Like, portfolios are something that are underused. And when you have a student present to their parents the 5 best things that they wrote or did that year that they're proud of, or maybe it's 3 if they can't get 5, but or it's 1, right? And they can show why it's good and what they were working towards. That's something the parent and child will not forget. I've seen schools institute that several times a year, portfolio presentations. And also anything that's a celebration of learning, where you have to explain and reflect on what you learned and identify the most important things.
I was thinking of, go ahead, Ashley, sorry.
No, I was just going to say one of my favorite assignments that I've ever done to end the year, specifically to end the year, is it's a paper where they have to do a revision reflection paper, where they pick a paper that they wrote earlier in the year and they have to revise it. But the part that makes it fun to me is I let them design the final project. Like, they write the rubric, they write together as a class. So we have a whole lesson where they sit there and they say, okay, well, these are the things we learned this year, so that should probably be great. Like, did I reflect and revise based off of these things so they have to sit there and they like it because they get to design the thing. So they think they're in charge. They are in charge of the learning and the assignment. They're making it what they want, but they also have to reflect on everything they learned throughout the year or the semester for me. And like what they learned and what they thought was important about what they learned, because those things should be what they revise their paper on. And then based off the assignment they create, they pick whatever paper they wanted to revise, whatever one they felt was the weakest or that they could change the most based off what they learned in the class. They pick it, they rewrite it, and they understand, we have to talk about this a lot, that you can't just pick your A paper and turn the same paper in because it's a revision project. So if you turn in the same paper because your original paper was really good, you didn't revise anything, you're not going to get a good grade on it. But they also write a reflection explaining what they changed and why it made it better. But the big part to me of that is the fact that I let them design the assignment. Because they're writing the reflection, they're not only reflecting on it to begin with before they even realize they're reflecting on it, but they also feel like, I'm going to do this assignment, I'm going to do it well because I wrote it. They think it's a fair assignment because they wrote it. They know what they're being graded on because they said, this is what I want to be graded on.
That's a lot of student ownership and a lot of metacognition and a lot of showing understanding of what good work is and understanding the expectations. So there's a lot of powerful learning and teaching in that assignment. I also want to remind folks, if I'm sure I don't have to remind them, that there's a lot of AI tools that can help us. Whenever I do a presentation now, I will often take whatever I have and say, give me 10 ways I can absolutely build interest and curiosity at the beginning of this presentation. What are some ways to end this presentation? And those are, they're pretty good. They give you some nice ideas, good things to think about. Any closing thoughts you guys have about beginnings and endings? Anything you really want people anything we didn't talk about that you think people should keep in mind as they begin and end a lesson, a unit, a year?
I loved it. I think the beginning should get you engaged, and the ending should help you remember that you learned something.
Yes,
right, and that you grew, and part of that mindset shift that we want, that learning is not fixed, that over time I learned things. I think that's learning is interesting. I'm naturally curious. That's our beginnings. And then at the end, I grew through being in, whether it's being in this lesson, being in this unit, or being in this class for a year, I grew as an individual. I think those are the things that we want to do as teachers, is remind kids that they're on a journey.
And we did a great job there of summarizing, which is another way to end a lesson and a great way for us to end this podcast. Thank you, everybody. I hope you all have a great beginning of the year, a great peak emotional experience, and a wonderful end of your lessons, units, and school years. See you back here next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode brought to you by the Southern Regional Education Board. SREB is a nonprofit dedicated to improving education from pre-K all the way to PhD and into the workforce. Visit sreb.org for resources on instructional practices, teacher data, career pathways, and more. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook at SREB-School Improvement and on Twitter/X and Instagram, both at SREB Education. See you next week.